Well, folks, here we are again. Another Disney remake. Another shallow, creatively bankrupt reimagining of a once-beloved classic. You might say, but Cletus, how could you possibly pass judgment on a film that is yet to be released? And I would say that I can. And I will. However, my dear viewer, it's not as if I am basing my claims off of my own personal bias. This is far from the first time that Disney has reimagined a timeless classic and turned it into a wet fart. It's not the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. Not until every ounce of brand recognition can be sucked from the teat that was the former Walt Disney Animation Studios. Not to mention, thanks to our very talkative lead, Rachel Zegler, we have a fairly good idea of the direction the story is going to go. So strap in as I take you on a journey through my not-so-politically correct takes on Disney's latest upcoming remake. Snow White and the Seven, vertically challenged, Snow White is set to release March of 2024 and stars Rachel Zegler as Snow White and Gal Gadot as the Evil Queen. There are a ton of writing credits on this film, but most of them are dead people who contributed to the 1937 animated version. Our main writing credit on the remake goes to Greta Gerwig, the same woman who wrote Barbie, so take that as you will. But make no mistake, this film is not Snow White. It is a reimagining with a modern edge, also known as a different story altogether with a title that people will recognize, driving ticket sales, and so on and so forth. We know this because this.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that is
not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
See, writers for Disney used to do this super cool thing where they would come up with an idea. Imagine that. They would come up with an idea for a story, and they would write that story. And then they would make a film out of that idea. It was the craziest thing. But now, with theater attendance dropping almost 40% since 2018, these big movie studios such as Disney don't like to take risks on new stories. They'd rather do a remake of Aladdin or The Lion King or The Little Mermaid, what have you. And before you blame the decline of ticket sales on COVID, know that in 2018, in the US and Canada, 1.3 billion movie tickets were sold. At the height of COVID in 2020, only 220 million. But in 2023, theaters are open, the world is opened, 800 million tickets sold. The theaters never fully recovered from COVID. And this is, of course, due to streaming. And if you want to know more about that and how streaming is a failing business model, watch this video here. Anyways, back to my point. You may be like me. You may be sick and tired of all the remakes. You may hate the bastardization of these beloved classics. But it cannot be denied that these films do make money. Lots of it. It's a safe investment for Disney, and until fans stop showing up to the theaters to watch them, they'll just keep being made. So what else do we know about this film? Well, they race-swapped Snow White, but before you throw a tizzy, let me explain why this in particular casting choice bothers me. I'm not typically bothered by characters being race-swapped. When dealing with a very well-established character portrayed in books, games, comics, what have you, I do think the casting of said character should in most cases remain faithful to the source material. That being said, this in general doesn't usually get me too worked up. What bothers me is when there's very obvious intent behind the casting. You hear executives and directors and writers say things such as, "We hired the best person for the job." And that's all well and good, but it's also total bullshit most of the time because I know that casting directors typically have a look in mind when casting for a role. Perhaps not a side character, but certainly a lead. Take The Witcher as an example. As someone who read the books and played the video games, I noticed every single side character that didn't look the way they were described in the books or appeared in the games. That said, did it bother me? Not really. I noticed, but I can't say it really bothered me. However, if Geralt, the main character, had been cast as a, say, Middle Eastern man, you can bet your ass I'd be pretty pissed. He's a character I know and love, and I expect him to be portrayed on screen faithfully. It also hasn't always gone white to black or white to brown or whatever. There are some examples of characters being race-swapped for white actors, such as Fox from Wanted, Angelina Jolie's character, or Nora from Warm Bodies. However, it most often doesn't happen this way. With Hollywood's push for more diversity and representation in film, we are often seeing traditionally white characters being replaced with people of color. This obviously isn't an inherently bad thing, it only becomes bad when you disrespect the original source material in a blatant and obvious way. Not to mention, motives matter as well. In 2020, the Academy Awards announced a new set of rules to encourage diversity in film. To be eligible for Best Picture, a film must meet 2 of the 4 new diversity standards. Standard A. Either one lead or significant supporting character is from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 30% of the acting ensemble is from at least 2 underrepresented groups, such as women, LGBTQ, disabled, deaf people, and the storyline centers on an underrepresented group. Standard B. At least 2 creative leaders or department heads must be from an underrepresented group. At least 6 crew or technical positions must be from an underrepresented group. Or at least 30% of the crew must be, you guessed it, from an underrepresented group. Standard C. The film's production, distribution, or financing companies offer paid internship or apprenticeships and training opportunities for people from underrepresented groups. And Standard D. The film studio must have multiple senior executives from underrepresented groups on its marketing, publicity, or distribution teams. So there you have it, the Academy Awards' new standards to be eligible for Best Picture. Some may call this progress, I call it discrimination. Motives matter. I'm sure most filmmakers aspire to have their film up for Best Picture, so naturally these standards put most filmmakers in a situation where it's not about the best person for the job, but about potentially being eligible for the biggest award in filmmaking, or not. Circling back to Snow White, the original animated film was inspired by a 19th century German fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. In the original tale, Snow White is described as having lips red as a rose, hair black as ebony, and skin white as snow. So, she was white. As white can get, supposedly. Nothing against Rachel Zegler, but she certainly isn't white as snow. In my opinion, and it is just my opinion, this is a race swap that I really can't get behind. Her whiteness is a core part of her character. Her name's Snow White, for God's sake. This isn't just your average Hollywood race swap, this is something more. This is akin to casting T'Challa from Black Panther as a white guy. And you might say, well, you could make this analogy about any film or television character who's been race swapped, but you really can't. T'Challa's skin color was an important part of his character. He is an African king, he is the Black Panther. His character came around shortly after the Civil Rights Movement, and Stan Lee and Jack Kirby wanted to make a black hero. Swapping his character with a white guy wouldn't be some mindless decision. If that happened, we the audience would know there was intent behind it. You would have to actively decide you didn't want him to be black, given that it's an important aspect of his character. So Snow White, whose name is Snow White, whose skin is white as snow, is being played by a woman of Colombian heritage. Am I allowed to be offended? The media would certainly say, of course not. Call me crazy, but I might just be a little offended. Way back in January 2022 on Mark Maron's WTF podcast, Peter Dinklage shared his thoughts on the casting of the 7 dwarves. Dwarves, of course, referring to the mythical fantasy dwarves, not real-world little people, but Peter Dinklage doesn't seem to understand the difference between the two. No, Dinklage, who fancies himself as some sort of leader amongst the little people community, had this to say, quote, "They were very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White, but you're still telling the story of Snow White and the 7 dwarves? Take a step back and look at what you're doing there. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that effing backwards story about 7 dwarves living in a cave together. Have I done nothing to advance the cause from my soapbox? I guess I'm not loud enough." End quote. So this could quite easily just stand as one man's opinion on the topic and nothing more. However, Disney, being the progressive, virtue-signaling superheroes that they are, just had to take action. The day of the interview's publication, Disney stated that they wanted to consult with members of the dwarfism community on the film. And a day later, the studio decided to change the dwarf characters in the film to, quote, magical creatures. Probably could have spent a little more time than a day coming up with a better replacement for that name, but okay. Dwarves are commonly reoccurring characters in many fantasy works, so if companies like Disney are so aggrieved by lack of little people representation in TV and film, you'd think that these sorts of roles would serve as a great opportunity to bring more little people into the space. Not how Peter Dinklage or Disney sees it, I suppose. So here's a look at our magical creatures. One of them's a little guy, but the rest are just regular-ass people. I mean, not totally regular, more like when you and your friends split a bag of magic mushrooms and decide to go on a walk through the woods. Either way, not everybody shared Dinklage's sentiments, and the Little People community wasn't very happy with the outcome of the situation. Actress and producer Tara Joel said that, quote, while she appreciated Dinklage speaking out, his power and privilege also creates adverse effects. Many little people in the entertainment industry don't necessarily agree with Dinklage's take. People in her family auditioned for the Disney film. With this condemnation, she said Disney made Dinklage the sole arbiter on the topic, end quote. Little person Kara Reedy, a journalist and documentarian, said, quote, he's no dwarf hero. He does not talk about it. He's only talked about it twice. He pretends like it doesn't exist, but he has not assisted. It's appropriate that Peter spoke his truth about how he feels, but I don't feel that it's appropriate that he is including the entire dwarfism community, end quote. And Joel also said, quote, because of equality in voices stating that they weren't okay with things like elf roles or dwarf roles or leprechaun roles, they've been eliminated. And not only are you not seeing a lot of little people in the acting industry anymore, but you're not seeing productions being created to give little people an actual role either, end quote. So in another lame attempt at not offending anyone, Disney manages to offend everyone. And these are the sorts of issues you run into when you preach these so-called progressive ideologies. Nobody can win. If you cast little people as dwarves in Snow White, people are gonna be offended, or at least pretend to be. And if you don't cast little people as dwarfs in Snow White, people are gonna be offended. It's a lose-lose because of the new social pit that Hollywood has dug for itself. It's not offensive to cast actors for roles that mimic the physical description of a character. That's simply the most logical thing to do, given that it is an adaptation. It's supposed to be a modern adaptation of a timeless story. A story about love, friendship, loyalty. If the creatives behind these sorts of projects spent more time adapting those ideals, instead of spending all their time desperately trying to create the least offensive film possible, maybe we'd end up with a halfway good story. But still, likely not. We've been told that this particular remake will have a modern edge to it. In recent years, these words have become synonymous with the butchering of classic stories. These words, or those similar, have been used to describe nearly every Disney live-action remake who attempt to change stories to make them more suitable for what the critical drinker would call modern audiences. Little do they know they're only making the stories worse. But don't tell them that. They'll catch on sooner or later. Let's hear what the cast has to say about this.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
Ah, yes, of course. That old-fashioned, outdated love thing. Certainly not suitable for modern audiences. How dare young people dream about love when they could be dreaming about being the leaders they know they can be. The current fad among Disney creatives is to give their version of the strong woman. I say their version because it's likely not yours. We all have a fundamental understanding of what a strong woman is. Most of us probably knew what a strong woman was around the time we were learning our ABCs. A mother, a grandmother, aunt, older sister, or any sort of female relative or even family friend that we viewed as a strong woman throughout our childhood. And as we grew older, that idea of what a strong woman was probably morphed and changed, and it likely doesn't look the same for everybody. However, I can almost certainly say it probably doesn't look much like Disney's version of a strong woman. Brash, cold, pretentious, unrelenting, and good at everything with little to no room for growth. But how could you have growth when your main character is already good at everything, always right, and everyone just needs to get on board? This isn't just annoying, but I do think this is a pretty harmful message, especially when these sorts of films are targeted at young people. A compelling character is a character that you can relate to, and men and women alike make mistakes all the time. It's how we deal with those mistakes which defines us, and this is the essence of a good story. Present character, present conflict, failure, redemption, credits, you get the idea. Instead, what we're seeing is you're right, you're always right, and everyone just needs to get with the program. You know best. I don't know about you, but I didn't know shit about shit when I was a kid, and I'm sure grateful my parents were quick to remind me of that. In the previous interview, we see Rachel Zegler state that it's no longer 1937, continuing by saying that Snow White will certainly not be dreaming about true love, but she'll dream about becoming the leader she knows she can be, implying that there is something wrong with dreaming of true love. She then says she thinks it's an incredible story for young people everywhere to, quote, see themselves in. whatever the hell that means. Just kidding, we know exactly what that means. This new idea that we the fans need to see ourselves represented on the screen. Quite literally, we need to visually be able to see ourselves in the character on screen. I don't know who got this idea that that was the case with film, but it's not, and it never has been. I talked about this in a previous video, so I'm not going to hammer this point in too hard, but being able to relate to the characters on screen, not just see yourselves in the characters on screen, is what makes for a compelling story. Maybe not even relating to, but an understanding of. It's like Thanos. I mean, he's a genocidal maniac, sure, but did he make some good points? Kinda. I mean, I get it. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what fantasy is. It's being able to relate to a character that is completely not you. It's fantasy. We're not witches or wizards or elves or dwarves, but we can relate to and understand character motivation if the writers do their jobs. You don't have to be a fish to relate to Nemo or Nemo's dad in Finding Nemo. You get my point. And what the hell is so wrong with true love? Love is strength, and from so many different angles. Love requires tremendous strength, especially when holding together a family. Love, especially new love, requires a tremendous amount of vulnerability and trust. Love is pain when dealing with the death of someone you cared about. And it is quite possibly the one thing we all share as humans, one thing we all have in common. We all want love. We all want to be loved and to love others. What could be nobler than to fight and to dream of true love? A timeless tale of love and friendship, Disney's first ever animated film, set to be reduced to its lowest form, March 2024. Well, that's the video, everyone. Please subscribe. I really love making these and I'd like to keep making them, so please subscribe and like the video. If you stuck around this long, I thank you for watching. Have a great day.